The devil's in the detail. It's a saying which applies a lot to my life, especially my van, which literally has a picture of Lucifer eating the heart of a child on the side of it. Have fun animating that, you beautiful editor. But it's taken to crazy lengths when it comes to video games. After all, if you're working on a project for years at a time on just one facet in a large team, you're going to sneak a lot of bits and bobs into your section, aren't you? In fact, often there's so much detail that it's often unfortunately overlooked, or even turns out to be completely pointless. But that's not to say that taking out the old microscope and having a look at the minutiae of games isn't damn cool when you find these little nuggets. With this in mind, I'm Jules of WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 completely pointless video game details that will blow your mind. Number 10. DEADSHOT'S name is written on all of the shell casings in Arkham Knight. Although his weapons are on display in the GCPD, DEADSHOT doesn't physically appear at all in Arkham Knight. However, that's not to say that the villain still doesn't have a hand in trying to take you down, as his name is engraved on all the RPG shells fired out by the tanks throughout the title. This is weird for a few reasons. One, DEADSHOT isn't really rich, so financing the other villains would be putting him seriously out of pocket. And two, he's a villain that prides himself on accuracy and personal killing, so a remote-controlled tank shell doesn't really seem to fit the bill. Then again, this might be a joke made by the devs or even the villains themselves, mocking his inability to end the Caped Crusader. Number 9. The coordinates on Black Ops 2's tactical insertions correlate with real-life locations. When it comes to Call of Duty, there are many things that you're going to have to juggle at once. Running, gunning, and a defense against your mummin, and therefore you're probably not going to notice a blink and you'll miss it detail when you use a tactical insertion. It turns out that the coordinates that show up on the tactical insertion gadget actually correspond with wherever the multiplayer map you're playing is geographically located. Changing depending on your location, you probably won't even notice the coordinates unless you freeze frame the split second that they're on screen. But that was enough for players to figure out that they were much more than just throwaway numbers, and were actually authentic to their location. Number 8. Individual raindrops get washed away in DRIVECLUB. Now, it wasn't the best game by any stretch, but it was a beautiful one, including an incredible amount of detail being poured into the weather effects. This was actually upped post-release, as the devs added in an update which boosted weather effects massively. With the update, each individual droplet of rain was rendered as its own asset, having its own path to follow that could be impacted by wind and other environmental changes. Consequently, if you look closely enough, you can see each drop hit either the road or the car before splashing off. Likewise, when the window wipers are on, each droplet gets brushed to the side, leaving its own individual trail of water in the process. That is mad. Number 7. The eyes of horses in Assassin's Creed Origins reflect the world. Spending an extra year to focus on Origins was the right thing to do. Even if the game still suffered from a fair few bugs on its release, the game was for the most part absolutely gorgeous. And there are a bunch of little details that you probably missed while playing this game, from the way that the sand interacts with the wind to the direction of the water influencing your swimming speed, but some are so minute that it's a mystery why time was even put into creating them at all. By far the craziest feature is that the eyes of the animals, in particular horses and camels, actually reflect the world if you look closely enough. It's only a static image, but if you zoom in while using the photo mode, you'll be able to see the shine of the world in their eyeballs, reflecting even where the player is standing. Number 6. Metal Gear Solid 2's ice cubes melt in real time. I mean, yeah, this is insane that somebody programmed ice cubes to melt in real time. Then again, this is a game series which has more batshit on it than one of your mum's bestiality scat flicks, but still, yeah, it's a thing, and I can't figure out why. Number 5. Realistic environments in Ubisoft games. Okay, so here's my take on Ubisoft. I believe that one day they will make the best game ever, but only because every other game they've made does one thing really well and not so much in all the other areas. That's just my opinion. It does seem, however, that environments are the one thing that Ubi is beginning to nail. As I said before, Assassin's Creed Origins had a beautiful world, Far Cry is always interesting to look at, and The Division was really impressive because of the way it handled snow. The snow was fully interactable and covered the environment in a realistic way. The way it would lay on cars was natural, and brushing up against these vehicles would cause the snow to be pushed off and fall to the floor. It's a super small touch in the grand picture of things, but it was much appreciated in an otherwise slightly dry shooter. Number 4. Geralt's beard grows as time passes in The Witcher 3. Weirdly enough, one of the biggest features talked about in the run-up to The Witcher 3 wasn't how expansive the game's open world was or how detailed the story was going to be, but how the main character Geralt's beard would grow as the RPG progressed. I bet Peter Molyneux felt that acorn turning into a tree bullshit more than ever because of this. Growing in different phases as time passed, if you spent too long wandering the wilds of the game's open world, you would go from cleanly shaven monster hunter to looking like, well, you spent weeks living off the land in the mountains. It doesn't really add anything to the grand scheme of things, but it's another reminder of how time doesn't stand still while you're out journeying through the world of The Witcher 3. Number 3, Uncharted 4's rocks have their own independent physics. Uncharted 4 is a visual powerhouse, but by far the most pointless and impressive little feature that the devs decided to include was the way that the rocks moved. While you can slide down certain contextual hills in Uncharted 4, the rocks that start crumbling all around you have their own physics systems. They aren't just an effect or one big texture, and if you decide to shoot them individually before you commit to a slide, you can watch them as they start to fall away and slide down the hill. It's a needless detail, but what's interesting is that this could be a leftover from an old prototype of the sequel, where shooting the environments to make climbable bullet holes, for instance, was intended to be a much larger part of the experience. Number 2, the ants in Skyrim. No matter your view of Skyrim, there's no denying that it created one of the most lifelike open worlds the industry has ever seen. It evolves whether or not you interact with the environment or not, and NPCs will go about their daily routines while you're out smashing vampires and bashing bandits. However, one of the biggest examples of Skyrim's living, breathing world is one you might need a magnifying glass to notice. Because if you look closely at certain parts of the environment, you'll be able to see a trail of ants, all of which have their own path and set routes going about their daily routine. That's right, not only do the people get on with their lives while you're not around, but even the ants as you carelessly tread all over them as well. It's weird to think that Skyrim as a place would just exist perfectly fine whether you were in it or not, which is kind of weird, like an existential crisis. Yeah, think about that the next time you boot it up. And number 1, Shenmue's weather was based on real-life forecasts from 1986. Long before the likes of The Elder Scrolls or GTA would get all the credit for doing the same thing, Shenmue was having the time of its life pioneering systems that would come to signify the open-world genre. There is, quite frankly, a preposterous level of detail in this game, but nothing beats the actual weather system options in the settings, which sees real forecasts from 1986 to 1987 Yokozuna, which is the area that the game is based in, used to dictate how the weather should be at any point in the game. The devs could have just put in any old weather system in place and it wouldn't have made a difference, but for some reason, almost as if they absolutely loved making their game, they thought that mimicking the actual forecast from the real world would make their game seem much more fleshed out. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 completely pointless video game details that will blow. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Twitter at RetroJ with a 0, or you can follow me over on Instagram, which is at RetroJ with a 0_ Insta, where I do all of my model painting. It'd be great to show them off to you beautiful people.